Good evening, everyone. It's Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and I am here with Rachel Howzell Hall. Welcome, Rachel. It's so great to have you
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah.
I am so happy to be here. One of my favorite bookstores in all of the country.
Well, and it's funny, Rachel and I were talking. I don't know how we've missed it over the years, but you've been here 4 or 5 times, and
Uh-huh.
for whatever reason, our paths have never crossed. But I've always loved your work from afar, and so it's a real it's a treat to be able to talk to you tonight in these weird
And it's,
days.
I'm happy finally meeting you.
Yeah. Well, let me give you the formal intro that you deserve here, which is okay. Rachel Howzell Hall is the author of the acclaimed Eloise Lou Norton series, including Land of Shadows, Skies of Ash, Trail of Echoes, and City of Saviors, the standalone thriller They All Fall Down, and the co-author of The Good Sister with James Patterson, which appeared in the New York Times best-selling anthology The Family Lawyer. She's a senior development officer for the Donor Relations Department at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, which I want to ask you about.
Yes.
Currently, she serves on the board of directors for the Mystery Writers of America, is a member of Sisters in Crime, and has participated as a mentor in the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, Writer to Writer program. She lives in Los Angeles, and
Yes.
yeah, and
Yes.
and her work is such an important contribution to the to the literature of Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Just when you think people have analyzed and picked apart that city, it's an endless source of material for writers.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 4 million people here, and it gets bigger and bigger every day. But for someone like me who's lived here, it's the hometown. It's not as big, and you kind of know people everywhere you go. So, I love my LA stories, and I love the city, and my stories are kind of love letters to not only the city but to the people who live here and who actually like it here.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating. It has such a fascinating history.
Yeah, yeah.
When you think about L.A. and it's sort of its boom and bust history.
Hmm.
From
Yeah.
the 30s on up.
And every neighborhood has its own history, and that's the great thing. We are where I grew up and where I live now in the Crenshaw area. We are constantly in flux in some ways. Either we're recovering from an uprising, or we're building. And right now we're building, and there's some gentrification. But that's LA. Everything's old and new at the same time, which is one of the most awesome things about the city.
Right. As you say, it's constantly reinventing itself.
Yeah,
And
which is perfect for this book.
yes.
Grace and Sykes and Isabel Lincoln are in the process of both of them, reinventing themselves and finding out who they are,
Right.
one from the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is perfect for Los Angeles.
Right. Yeah, and then this is the book right here, And Now She's Gone, which is a really terrific, ambitious thriller with all kinds of twists and questions of identity. And it's one of Rachel and I were talking just a few minutes ago before we started, and I'm determined tonight, folks, not to do any spoilers. So, can you just give a basic setup of the book, and then we'll kind of dig in as much as we can.
Yes, so this is a story about Grayson Sykes, who just started her career as a private investigator. She's had one case so far, but that was to find a missing chihuahua named Cheeto. But now she gets to search for a real live person. And her first client is Dr. Ian O'Donnell, who is an emergency cardiac doctor at UCLA. And he's looking for his girlfriend, Isabel Lincoln. More than that, though, yes, he wants to find Isabel, but Isabel absconded with his beloved Labradoodle, Kenny G. And so
I
Brady's
love that name, by the way. I just love
this is
that.
Kenny G.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I actually saw a dog like that. I'm like, oh, I like that dog. He looks like Kenny G's hair. So that's where it came from. So Gray has to find Isabel. The problem is Isabel wants to remain missing, and so throughout the book, Gray is she's she's conflicted because she has a job to do. We all have jobs to do, but there's something about this case and something about Ian O'Donnell where she's not sure that she wants to help him find her.
Right. And
Yeah.
and you're also juggling, two different timelines, two different narratives, really.
Yes.
How much can you say about that?
Well, Gray used to know a woman named Natalie Dixon a long time ago. And because of her history with Natalie Dixon, she she's reluctant to look for a woman who may have experienced domestic abuse. So as Gray is going, along looking for Isabel, there are flashbacks of the life of this woman named Natalie Dixon.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And the through line that I mean, there's a lot in the book. There's, it's really, we meet these various women in the book that are, survivors in one way or another of, horrific abuse and loss, and
Yeah.
How different people cope and deal with these things.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, I guess, the psychology of trauma, really, and how we react to it? Can you talk about the
Yeah.
research and how you came up with the basic idea?
Right. So domestic abuse has always been like one of those big issues that I've always wanted to talk about. Growing up and seeing how people in their relationships treat each other, I'm always fascinated by that. Yeah, surrounded by adults as a kid, I was, being the bookish kid, you're nosy and not necessarily getting all involved in people's business, but you pay attention
Sure.
to how they're talking to each other. When you go over to a friend's house, how their parents are interacting, how your own parents are interacting. And, there are some cases and some instances where you have personal, very close friendships with women who are being abused in their relationship. And you don't necessarily know, but something's off. At church, you see, puppy eyes and makeup kind of covering things that kind of look weird. And so I was fascinated by that. And again, as a kid of, growing up in church and hearing that marriage is forever, I wasn't always convinced that it should be, even as a child. It's like, well, even if the person hits you, you're supposed to stay with that person. And the answer was yes, till death do you part. And that bothers me. It's like, what gives, if I am to treat my body like a temple, why does someone else get to beat my temple up? And those were my thoughts when I was little. And so, just like, a whole bunch of other things that just stayed with me, I wanted to write this story about how I felt about domestic abuse and what people will do, not just women, but people will do for love, especially when they haven't had much. And for Gray and this woman named Natalie Dixon, they are, lacking in love. And so they will stick with these kind of bad relationships in order to have something,
Right.
So I wanted to address that. I also wanted to talk about the duality of women, especially, and how we keep ourselves back or keep ourselves quiet to just get along. Bray, for instance, she is bothered by Ian O'Donnell. She can't stand the man. She even, is her boss Dominic wags his finger at her because he's like, you can't be a jerk to this guy. He's our client, and jerks pay our bills. So she's trying to figure out how she can separate herself, her personal self, from her job. So, and all that, of course, comes with trauma, how she's been brought up, what she's faced personally,
Right.
what she sees around her. And now, she's like I said, she's reluctant to find someone who may be experiencing trauma by this guy who's paying her. So, yeah, she is trying to work through some things, emotionally, and I wanted to also kind of convey that through her appendix surgery. She's
Yes.
experiencing, yeah, some health issues, which, we all sometimes ignore things that we should take care of.
Right.
Um, and they could be simple fixes, but with simple fixes, and she says this, come questions. You go to a doctor and they ask you questions, you know, how long you've had this, what your name is, your social security, all this information they're taking from you, and Gray doesn't want to share her information with anyone. And so she ignores the pain because with seeking help, you have to answer questions, not just to, you know, the healthcare provider, but your own self. Why am I not doing what I'm supposed to do when I'm smart and I know what the answer is? So yeah, it's all in there. Like you said, I wanted to put everything in there.
Well, it's funny. The canvas is a little bit larger than you usually use.
Hmm.
And the story, it's complicated, and the way
Yeah.
you sort of parcel out um, her backstory,
Yeah.
without getting into spoilers, but fairly early on, and as you were just saying, when we meet Grace at the beginning of the book, she is working for Nick Rader, company
Hmm.
Rader Consulting, and this is her
Yes.
first. Am I remembering this correct? This is her first real case,
Hmm.
right? And
Correct.
and from the very beginning, you can tell that she's a troubled soul, at
Yeah.
least as she's portrayed. And
Hmm.
she's looking over her shoulder a lot,
Yeah.
and there's that she has a pretty heavy backstory.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you just there's a neat little technological thing in the book that I wasn't aware existed, where she has a certain tracking device. Is
Yes.
that for real?
Yes, the authorized license plate reader,
That's
which there are cameras at major intersections all throughout Los Angeles and probably in Scottsdale and Phoenix and everywhere. And it feeds these big tech companies. One of them is Palantir. They have these cameras that read your license plate, and that data gets sent to clients. And clients include the police department, and they run this information, this plate information, and the make and model of your car against warrants, against wanted lists, and all kinds of things. So you're constantly being tracked, and this technology is actually available to anyone who has the money. So there are neighborhoods in Los Angeles who can get your personal automobile information just because they can afford it, and that's troubling. So yeah, there is an app, and you can check and see if a certain car has been around the city, and where exactly was that car found, because the camera is taking pictures.
right.
So yeah, that's a real thing, and
Wow.
it's actually really scary in terms of privacy,
Absolutely.
because it's not just the cops getting this information. It's like, well, when they get it, what are they doing with it, and who else is getting it,
Well,
and
it,
why?
it's like other forms of surveillance things. It's out there available to the highest bidder, and the
Yeah,
highest bidder is
I'm
not
like,
is not necessarily the one you want it to be. Well, that's nice. You're
right.
rotating.
Okay. The beautiful sunshine. We are actually getting like blue sky right now.
Ah,
It's shining through for a change. So
right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, all this surveillance stuff. It's as you say, it has some really miraculous applications, but it's very disturbing. Because
yeah,
once the
yeah.
genie's out of the bottle, yeah,
Right. I mean, it's helpful for Gray in her professional life, but for her personal life, she doesn't like it, because this is the woman who doesn't like answering questions,
right,
from her doctor. So it's once again, it's this kind of up and down. What are the benefits and the cons of information, and in your attempts to hide who you are?
right.
Yeah.
And well, and so anyway, as you said, the first her first client is this cardiologist who seems like a real asshole.
Oh yeah.
um,
Oh yeah.
and now when I read, I didn't realize about your day gig.
Uh-huh.
Would this doctor recognize himself if?
No, you would not. Because fortunately, I don't work directly with them, but I've been a patient, right? I've been, as we all have, and we've, you know, I've gotten great care and I've gotten whack care. Who the doctor, I was 21 and I just started randomly getting nosebleeds just out of nowhere. And I went to the doctor because I never had nosebleeds up until this point. And the first question he asks is, "Are you doing cocaine?" And I'm like, "That's the first question. The first question you ask me is if I'm a drug addict, right?" And so I think about that because of all the professions, it's like doctors get to be jerks.
Yeah.
Handsome doctors really get to be jerks, and Ian O'Donnell is that doctor who can kind of say what he wants and treats people how he wants because he saves lives, So yeah, of all the people, he gets to be who he gets to be. It's going to come back and haunt him because Ray's going to find out the truth about him, but he gets to be who he wants.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and Gray can't say much about it because that's her client.
That's her
So
client.
all these microaggressions he gets to just pepper her with because he's the client and he's a doctor.
And yeah, and he's really, he's hiring her to find his girlfriend Isabel,
Uh-huh.
but he's really wants her to find the dog. I mean, that's
Yes,
his main.
that's his love.
His love,
That's-
Kenny G. That reminds me, man, I love that name. That reminds me of I just heard a great band name, which was called, instead of the Dead Kennedys,
Uh-huh.
the Dead Kenny G's.
Ah,
Have you ever
that's
heard
awesome.
that? That's pretty good. Yeah.
No, I have not. No,
Um,
but I love Kenny G because everybody wants the dog to be found in every
Yeah.
movie and every yeah.
right. Well, there's a lot, as we say, we're kind of talking around the story. It gets very complicated, and
Mhm.
some very. It's a really interesting kind of combination of plotting, really ingenious plotting device, and hardcore. Really getting into the character, dark character. Which came first for you when approaching this book? Did you start with character, and did the plot kind of lead out of character naturally, or did you have this kind of concept in your mind? This is what I want to try.
Well, it's weird because the story came a long time ago. My very first book, A Quiet Storm, was published in 2002, and I wanted to write a story about a woman disappearing because of a domestic abuse way back then. And being a baby writer, I did not know how to write it. And it took life experience and heartbreak and celebration and growing up and writing the Lou books and knowing how to do a procedural and making connections so I can ask questions of folks to learn how to write this story. Part of it also was I love magic, so we always go to magic shows and David Copperfield, and I was fascinated with Houdini growing up, and he has a magic trick called the Flight of Venus, where he makes a woman disappear, and that was the title of the story that I was trying to write, but it didn't go anywhere. But especially if there are any writers, young writers out there, you keep your stuff because you may need it. And as I learned how to write, the character has always stayed with me. The character of a woman trying to disappear has always stayed with me. And now that I had her, I had to figure out the best way to write it. And that came from, writing the Lou novels and They All Fall Down.
Right.
And also meeting David Corbett, who, who was a PI back in his day and who helped me, who taught me how to be a PI in some ways.
David's an awesome guy.
He is.
Terrific
He's
writer.
an incredible ally.
Yeah, good friend too.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So yeah, it was the character. It's always been the character, and then me learning how to actually plot it came way late. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Lou books a little bit, and tell me about as we were talking about, there are so many wonderful iconic LA characters.
Yeah.
Who did you grow up reading? Were there any models when you decided to start your own series?
I wanted to write Terry McMillan meets Walter Mosley because I hadn't seen that, not growing up at least. Growing up, I was very much a genre kid. So if it had Stephen King's name on it, I read it. If it had Jackie Collins's name on it, I read it. I wanted to be Lucky Santangelo from the Lucky novels. I also read, my older brother was in prep school, so whatever books he brought home, Johnny Got His Gun, The World According to Garp, all that, I'd read those too. Flowers and Attic and Johnny Got His Gun at the same time. So I was always kind of this weird, even back then, a book slut. It didn't matter what, it was. If it was words, I wanted to write it. And so growing up and being as well read as I did notice that there was no Black Nancy Drew.
Yeah.
She didn't exist. It took me several years to meet Black genre writers. I met Gary Phillips in 1996 when I worked at Penn American Center. Paula Woods, her too. And that's when I'm like, okay, so this can happen. And then Walter Mosley wrote Devil in a Blue Dress. It's like, oh, wow. And then Terry McMillan wrote Waiting to Exhale. And I was like, oh my God. It's like, well, what would happen if I put these two things that I love together? And, it took me some health issues for me to be brave enough to say, you know what? I've seen the scary stuff because when I was pregnant with my daughter, I had a weird kind of breast cancer. So, I've been used to what true fear is, and writing a book was not that. And so it's like, well, let me try and figure this out. And I did 2 self-published books through the Kindle program, getting closer and closer to procedurals. When I finally was like, okay, I'm ready to write this book. I'm going to call it Land of Shadows, and she is going to be Walter Mosley meets Terry McMillan, and Lou was born. And my prayer had been, I just want one book, especially after, having that first book published September 11th, 2002, which, as you could probably imagine, was not good for business for me. But Forge loved it. My editor, Kristen Sevick, she loved it, and she wanted another, and then she wanted more. And here I am.
That's fantastic.
After all this time. But, it sucked not being able to land a contract between 2002 and 2013. But I am never one to just kind of sit and complain. I will complain, but I will also work. And so in that time between, being a young mom and being a survivor and being a day jobber, I write and read and start attending conferences and making those connections. And part of me is like, oh, I wish it would have happened sooner, but it happens when it happens. And I'm glad that I'm in a spot now where I'm doing a lot of events and going away a lot. And my daughter is 16 now, and she doesn't need me as much as she would have had this happened earlier. So everything happens for a reason.
Is your daughter copping an attitude yet?
She's an only child, so
okay.
so she's one of those she was ordering lamb chops when she was 4, because she's around adults all the time, and she's around, artists all the time. When Land of Shadows had a UK publisher, she went with me, she and my husband went with me, and she's at this fancy, literary English dinner with reporters from the UK Times, and
wow.
this is just her life.
That
So
seems
she's wonderfully well adjusted, and she's sweet. We've raised her to be a grateful, sweet kid, a great spirit, great soccer player. And she, she's now being very helpful. She helped with some edits for my next book over the summer since she was here. It's like, well, I'll pay you to put some edits in, and she did it.
Damn, that's
Did
great.
my all my videos that I did this year
Yeah.
on socials. She directed those and imagineered those. So
Is that right?
she's
Wow. Real accomplished,
yeah,
accomplished kid.
yeah, yeah. She's great. So
Well,
yeah,
living in that kind of magical environment where, the arts are a big part of
Mhm.
her parents' life,
yeah,
it can't help but rub off on you.
yeah,
That's really great.
yeah, yeah. And the whole crime thing. Initially it's a little concerned because of what I write, but
Yeah.
she's into it and she likes story and she's always if she sees something that's interesting on the news, she'll send it to me. Like my husband will send me like weird stories. It's like this is a good story idea. So we're all in this together.
Your antenna constantly out
Uh-huh.
there picking
Yeah.
stuff up. Yeah, we had an interesting conversation last night, and we had a couple of authors from this Akashic anthology that's just out called the Nicotine Chronicles,
Oh
which is
yeah.
all about smoking and anyway.
Mhm.
But we got into an interesting.
I know Lee Child was
Yeah, Lee
on.
Child and
Uh-huh.
Bernice McFadden.
Pretty. Yes.
Yeah, and Robert Ariano. It was a great, really fun discussion.
Uh-huh.
But we were talking about crime fiction, and how the crime novel has the ability, or it seems to, when it's at its best,
Hmm.
to really give you an idea of what's going on in American cities.
Yeah.
Kind of at the street level, in
Yeah.
a way that some other kinds of fiction, can, but you really get to see what's going on.
Well, there's a reason why there's like 600 CSIs and Law and Orders and all that. It's because, like Jesus taught parables, crime fiction and mystery kind of does the same thing. We talk about these very big, scary ideas, but in a way that people get some type of closure. You know what's supposed to happen and you want it to happen. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily, but it's very easy to fall into, to see yourself as this detective or this PI or this scorned wife who's trying to find out secrets, right?
Right.
And I like that, and I like that as time goes on and as publishers and agents recognize that there have not been as many writers of color as there should be, we're now getting stories of these cities from the people who actually have lived in these cities that populate, crime fiction. My stories, Tracy Clark's, Kelly Garrett, all these different kind of stories that, just makes our genre even richer.
Absolutely, and it's funny. I was talking with Walter Mosley
Mhm.
earlier in May, I think, and I don't know what it is about Walter, but he and I, for some reason, were just simpatico, and I love talking with him. And I was saying, you were such a trailblazer in so many ways because,
Mhm.
we think we know Los Angeles. We
Yeah.
know Raymond Chandler's Los Angeles.
Right.
We know James M. Cain's L.A. We know
Uh-huh.
Nathaniel West's L.A.
Uh-huh.
But Walter Mosley showed us the Central Avenue scene.
Uh-huh.
He showed
Mhm.
us a Los Angeles that uh, hasn't been shown really
Right.
in literature as much. And,
Right.
opened up, and now you're seeing a much more complete view of what's going on emerging, which is really, really important.
And there's so many stories in this town, and the area that I always write about, like I said, is where I grew up and where I live now, and there are issues between neighbors and who's moving in and who's moving out, and you know how the cops interact, down to eating. In the book, and now she's gone. I like have Gray eating at the soul food restaurants and barbecue and tacos and all the great cuisine that Los Angeles is known for and that we love. I mean, it's more than just Hollywood here. It's more than just Silver Lake or downtown. There's so many, places to leave bodies. It's a wonderful place. And then you get in your car and drive, and no one knows you, and everyone knows you. And I say that I think in like the second chapter, where people may see that as a flaw, but as an Angelino, I like that kind of anonymity, but not an anonymity. It's a weird thing where folks are looking at you, but whatever was over there. Whatever was over there. I'm just trying to get home. I like that.
Yeah, I love it. And
You
LA,
don't know.
I'm sorry.
You don't know who anyone is, and I remember. You go into a restaurant and you're like, I think that's so and so, but they're kind of like dressed down, and you don't bother him because he's trying to have his dinner. There are producers who are wearing ratty sweats and torn sweatshirts, and you don't know because we don't have to dress up when we go to, you wear. My husband has a pair of dress sneakers. He has a pair of all black Air Jordans because those are his dress shoes.
This is formal wear.
That's his formal wear. And I have a pair of black leather Vans, and those are my formal Vans because that's what Los Angeles is. And I love that, and I like reflecting that in my stories.
We have a great customer who this wonderful woman named Angela, who every time she comes in, she has a pair of Dickies overalls, and her formal wear is a pair of white Dickies overalls, and she's just the coolest lady.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, again, getting back to some of the themes in the new book. LA, it's an endless source of fascination. The intersection of Hollywood and Vine, was it represented the promised land, for many generations of, a lot of girls coming out to seek their fortune, and obviously it didn't work out for the vast majority of them,
right?
And they fall into this kind of interesting, gritty underbelly of Hollywood. So you get that lightness and the light and the dark all mixed together, and this weird kind of occult element to it as well. In Los Angeles with the Colts and Amy Semple McPherson, and it's just such a fascinating place.
Right. I remember as a kid in the 70s, I remember driving by the church where, with my parents, of course, where Jim Jones had his headquarters down here. And I didn't understand what that meant, but I remember my parents' reaction toward it. And it's like, that's LA. I'm driving my daughter around places now showing, oh, that's where so-and-so got shot, and that's where that happened over there, and he OD'd right over there. That's, where Joaquin Phoenix's brother River, that's, so she's learning this, this great history of Los Angeles. I mean, even in her lifetime, she's seeing things come and go.
Yeah.
And then things being built up as though they never existed in Silicon Beach, they're calling it now, over in Playa del Rey. She grew up where it was just marshland. It was, the wetlands. And now today, Facebook is over there, Twitter's over there, Google. You wouldn't know that this was marsh. And that's just in her lifetime, she's noticed that. So, and there are stories there, How did those companies get to take over marshland? That's a novel, right? So, again, so many neighborhoods, so many stories, so many faces of LA that I'm glad we're open to diverse voices writing those stories.
Yeah, it's about time,
I think so.
It's funny, we were visiting before we got started, and my mother lived in Eagle Rock.
Yes.
And when I was born in Los Angeles, and we came here to Phoenix when I was 3 years old, but she talks about driving around when I was just a little baby in downtown LA around the courthouse when the Manson trial was going on.
Ooh,
And how all the followers would be hanging out outside the courtroom, and you drive around, and if Charlie shaved his head, they all shaved their head.
Wow.
If Charlie carved the X in their forehead, they all did, and just and that's LA for you, just this.
Well, here's an LA thing. So my grandmother died in what was it, 1994? I think it's going to be. And we were all in the family cars on the 10 freeway driving west, and we see all these police cars coming in the opposite direction, and this white Bronco passes by our family cars. And we've been in a funeral all day, and especially a black funeral, so that's like 12 hours you're in a funeral, and we had no idea that O.J. Simpson was in that white Bronco being chased by the LAPD.
Wow.
It's like, that's not an LA thing. It's like, well, what's this chase? Yeah.
Right. Now, just for all of you that are watching on Facebook, when I look at my phone, I'm not trying to be rude to Rachel here. I'm just trying to see what questions you might have. So please, if you have some questions, send them in, and I'll do my best to ask a few of them here. Got a lot of people watching, and quite a few just saying how much they love your work, and a lot of love here. That's great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming, huh?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about Lou. Was there kind of a model for her? And I know you've talked about this before, I'm sure, but do you have kind of some cop friends that you can go to when getting those procedural details down?
Well, when I first started writing Lou, I knew no one. I actually somehow connected. How did I? Oh, a work friend knew a detective in the LAPD, and he was actually involved in the Rampart division case.
Oh,
like,
really?
if you searched his name, it's like, oh, you did that thing. But he agreed to talk to me, which is wonderful because no one else agreed to talk to me. Michael Connolly gets all the, everybody wants to talk to him. No one wanted to talk to me in the LAPD except this one detective. And so I talked to him, and we went to Starbucks, and we talked for like 3 hours. And he told me about the life of a detective and the culture of the LAPD. But he was a man. So it's like, well, for women, how is that different? And so I attended my very first conference, and it was the Writers Police Academy in Greensboro, North Carolina, with Lee Laughlin. And I went, and there were a few, I think there were 2 detectives there, female detectives there. And one was a Black woman. And after every session she did, I would basically kind of corner her and just ask all these questions. And I asked, the biology questions and the sex questions and family and friends questions. And she was very open. And that's how I started modeling Lou, between, meeting with the LAPD homicide detective and these women cops who were in North Carolina. And then lots and lots of reading. I read David Simon's work. I read Miles Corwin. Of course, I'd already read Michael Connolly and Raymond Chandler and all the great, LA crime writers. I'd read all those too. But I then read Paula Wood's work, and I read Valerie Wilson Leslie's work.
Right.
And all of it kind of helped me form who she would be and what I wanted her to do. I wanted her to be a stronger, braver me. I mean, we went to the same college, Lou and I. We're the same age. I wanted her to police the neighborhood where she grew up, and her neighborhood is my neighborhood. So there's so many things about her that are me, but she wants to help people in a way that I don't care to.
Right.
I am not putting myself between a bullet and life and death.
Right.
So I wanted her to be a fully formed woman, because talking especially to the Black female cops, they're not lone wolves. They don't go off by themselves. They are surrounded by family and friends and community. They are a big part of their community. So I wanted to reflect that too. I wanted her to be the cop I wanted to see growing up in LA in the 80s. So So yeah, she's a great mix of everything. I loved Lou. I loved writing her adventures. I loved her and Colin together and her teaching him how to be a better cop and a better person.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk just for a few minutes about They All Fall Down.
Yeah.
Was it kind of a riff on the classic locked room caper in a sense,
Yeah.
but just with an
Yeah.
island community? Yeah.
Yeah. And for that, again, all these things just stay with me and I have to write them out. Sin, growing up in the church, like I said, I was always fascinated by you do this, this happens, you do that, you go to hell. And all the rules, there's so many rules. And and I liked the Agatha Christie story, even though, the title was, well, both titles were pretty racist and black folks weren't even involved in the book. So I wanted to take that very British thing and put an American spin on it with first person. And if you've read, the book, you know that there's something in there toward the end where it's like, well, how are you going to do that with it being first person? So I wanted to be a first person, and I wanted the first person to be an African American woman who is so unlike Lou in some ways. She is smart like Lou, she's perceptive like Lou, but she don't know how to shut up. And Miriam will say what she wants because she is that person, and I like her for that. She refuses to not be ignored. She will not be ignored. And I wanted her to reflect one of the seven sins, which are, embodied by the characters there. She's envy. She's a mom of a certain age, and she loves her daughter, but she also doesn't like being taken advantage of. And sometimes that overrules her love for her daughter. She calls it love, but it's not always love. And so, she gets sent to this island for a reckoning. And it was fun. It was fun taking, again, this very British idea and putting very American ideas into this story. From the restaurants that serve the 12 burger patties and all that French fries and eggplant and all that into a meal, to Black Widows. I was fascinated by it all, and They All Fall Down let me play. Yeah.
What's next on your plate? Are you going to go back and do another Lou book, or do you have other plans?
I have other plans. My next book will be out next August, and it's called These Toxic Things. And it's another LA story, because why not? And it follows a young woman named Mickey, who is, I call her a digital archaeologist. Basically, she's a glorified scrapbooker, and she works for this company called the Memory Bank, where the Memory Bank holds memories, pictures, mementos, all kind of things, and will, like an Alexa, spit them back to you. Like you can say, Memory Bank, tell me about my honeymoon in Greece, and it will have this narrative that Mickey's written, along with pictures and a GPS of where these special memories are happening. And so she is curating these special memories for a curio store owner named Nadia. And the second day where she's working with Nadia to curate these special memories, Nadia winds up dead. And so Mickey's finding out things about the store and about these special things, while also finding out things about her own origin story.
Wow.
And so it's a story about memory and identity, once again, in LA.
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
That's next August.
And
I can't talk to you about it.
what's the title again?
These Toxic Things.
Sounds about right for our times, right?
Yeah.
Let me see if we have any questions here. Let's see. Wonderful, wonderful author. Lots of good comments. Lou is an amazing character, lover.
Thank you.
So a lot of people are just seem to be enjoying the program. So so that's awesome.
I must say it's been an an incredibly weird experience being a writer in a pandemic.
Yeah.
In some ways, life for me hasn't changed because, you know, I write for my daytime job, but because I write for a large medical center who had the most COVID patients in Los Angeles, that meant that I was writing a lot of crisis communications, fundraising materials, all at home. And so I didn't get to, one, have that kind of separate space
Yeah.
because now all my work stuff is crowding this dining room table where I'm now working. And also, I did a lot of writing in my car. In traffic, I would think about what I wanted to write next. I'd hash out, the plot lines and where I'm stuck, and I'd write it all in my little pad or my post-it notes as I'm, writing. I mean, as I'm driving, and I don't have that anymore. And so all that kind of thinking time is gone in some ways. And I didn't realize it until I had to drive somewhere, and things that I was trying to figure out, they came to me like that as I was driving. It's like this weird muscle memory. And now I'm like, well, maybe I should just drive around randomly and think about my books. It's not the same with me walking somewhere because
Yeah.
you can't really, I guess you shouldn't drive and write either, but I'm so used to driving and writing that that's what I do. So yeah, it's been interesting, and I still get up at 5, but at least now I get a little bit more time because I don't have to go anywhere. I just sit at my table and write for some time. And we actually bought a real desk for our office. So today was my first day at a desk, a sit-stand desk at that. And I wrote this morning, and it was wonderful.
Oh,
Oh, it
good.
was wonderful.
So it didn't kill your
And
creativity.
yeah, it was like I have a place for my stuff, for my post-it notes and my pens. It felt good.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
I was going to ask, are you getting to the place where you're going to be able to quit your day gig?
I don't know. If there's a lot of money involved, yes.
You need a
But
TV deal.
I know exactly. I need Hollywood to come through because, I have a 16-year-old, and college is just 2 years away.
Yeah.
And so somehow, although my husband makes a great living, college is not cheap nowadays. It wasn't like when I was at Santa Cruz and it was $11,000 a year or something crazy like that. So, and also, having a day job, I don't have to depend on myself to be creative. You know what I mean? I am paying the bills, we have food, and that's because of the day job.
Right.
Book money is, gravy money. It's, paying down some tuition because my daughter goes to private school. It's, we need new tires money. And, the dog has to go back to the vet for what? Oh my gosh. So yeah, I'm not rolling in it, but it's a blessing, and it comes just right on time.
Yeah. How?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the James Patterson project, and how was that? Was that fun to do?
That was fun to do. It was, first of all, it was so weird because my agent Jill called me. I was still at work, and it was a Friday, and so I'm exhausted. It was around 3 o'clock, and she's like, "I have something interesting," and I'm like, "Okay." And she said that he had reached out and he liked my stories, my Lou Norton stories, and he didn't have an LA story, and because he liked my voice, would I be interested? And at that time, at 4 o'clock on a Friday after a long week, I was like, I'll think about it. Oh my God, I'm so tired. One more thing, right? But then, by the time I hit the Mexican food restaurant for Friday night tacos and margaritas, my husband's like, "Of course you're doing it." I'm like, "Of course I'm doing it. I'm tripping, of course." And so I immediately told Jill, yes, as soon as I finished that drink, and then learning, working with him and learning how he paces was a big lesson for me because with regular sized novels you get to go on and describe, and he's like, cut that. You get in, get out, end on a cliff, and then hit the next chapter. And it was writing with him where I learned how to do more structure and more plotting and pacing because he's the master of pacing.
Right.
It was an incredible experience. And sometimes when I'm feeling bad about myself and insecure, I have to remember that I'm one of the writers that got to write with James Patterson, and that's pretty damn cool.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I will
like,
always be grateful for that.
he's he's such a nice guy, and you want to, people talk about him, and this kind of stuff. And a number of years ago here at the Poison Pen, I was involved in setting up this yearly kind of charity luncheon thing to benefit the National Alliance for the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. And I would get it was the Arizona branch or whatever, and so each year I would have a number of crime writers, usually crime writers, come out, and it was funny because anytime I would pitch that, they'd be like, mentally ill? Oh yeah, of course. This is peer support. But so this group would pay to bring the writers out, and it was a nice event, and they always said, couldn't we get James Patterson? I'm like, yeah, there's no way in hell we're going to get James Patterson. And so I reached out to his publicist at the time, I think, and damned if he didn't say yes and pay all of his expenses to come out, didn't charge them a dime. And that's pretty damn solid, and I was very impressed by that.
No, he is incredibly generous. Yeah. He really is. Between working with no-name authors like me, to giving to libraries and to great causes like that. So, people talk, but I know it was a very meaningful experience to me. And I was finishing up the edit of that story that I wrote on the morning that I was going into surgery for yet another thing. And so, working on that story it was therapy for me. And again, I will always be grateful for that experience because I have gone through some stuff, and that's one touchstone for me that I get to say that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, let's see here. Do I have anything else I'd like to bring up here? There's so much in the book we could talk about. I love the ensemble cast and a lot of the supporting players. We could get into all that. I think like Nick and a lot of the characters. But we'll let the reader experience it.
Meet all of them, from Zadie to even Nan, who worked with Isabel at UCLA. I love her.
Right. And Rachel was kind enough to sign a batch of books for us. So we've got some signed copies here. So please help support this great book. And Rachel, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. It was a lot of fun.
Inviting me. I miss seeing you guys in person now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next year we'll be back to some semblance of normalcy.
Yes, our new normal.
Yes.
So I hope to see you in person.
All right, Rachel. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Let's stay in touch. It's great that we finally met.
Yes.
We got
let's do.
A lot of friends in common too, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, you have a great night, and thanks everybody for tuning in.